Hello everybody, Lawrence Fleming here. Well, I hope you're having a good weekend. We're coming up on Sunday night is the start of Yom Kippur. Yes, because it's actually the day on Monday, but it's all Hebrew dates start from the evening to the evening. So Sunday night through Monday night. Technically, this is not a holiday. We call it the holiest day of the year, but it is a day for remembrance, remembering God, remembering who you are, and making sure you are right. It is a day of fasting. It's not supposed to be a day of partying. There are plenty of those. New Year's was one. But this was just, they would repeat these rituals every year, and not having the temple, which is what all this is based about. They had to come up with their own versions to help remember. This would be the one day of the year that Aaron, who was the high priest, and his sons that work with him, would go into the temple, sprinkle blood on the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant, as an atonement for sin for the Israeli people. So that's the basic meaning of it. Yom is day. Kippur is a variation of Kippur, I think it is. That basically means a covering or to cover. That's what it does. It covers the people so that God cannot see the sin. There was nothing in biblical history that got rid of sin until Jesus died for it. God proved all the way through the Old Testament and into the beginning of the New that nobody could get to heaven through works. That's what the Old Testament shows. Trying to get to heaven through works. By doing good things, by helping people, by not sinning. No one could do it. There were people that did better than others. God pointed them out. There's something in the air that's making my nose itch. Got to put up with it. Incense. We need incense. God loved incense. Now, he didn't like the sacrifices, he said later on. He really didn't like it, but he did it for the people. So they'd have something that they could do to cover their sins, to allow them to then continue on with their normal lives, with or without God, and try to find their way to heaven. Didn't work. He tried to have the people of Israel be the representative to the world. Here's my best people, follow what they do. They spent more time being punished than being representatives. If you want to follow the life of any human on this earth, Jesus would be the only one that you could follow. Now, in a Jewish family, the majority of the people growing up in a household would be workers. Probably 95% would go to work on the family farm or business or whatever it is. A small fraction, through their studies, through their discipline and displaying how they are, a priest would come up to him and want him to go into the ministry. And he'd come up to this individual, this child of this family, and say, "Follow me." And he would take him, he would make sure he's educated in the spiritual realm, and put him to work in a temple or synagogue. They were chosen by the priests of these little towns. Everybody, it's like any place, it's like in America, any little town, everybody knows everybody. Jesus couldn't go back to Nazareth and teach. But they were chosen. So when Jesus is walking along the lakeshore, and he sees a couple of fishermen, and he says, "Follow me," they knew what it was. This is why it is so important to know the context and the people that these messages are for. You say, well, why would somebody just follow this stranger walking along? He said, follow me. They were calling him rabbi, which simply means teacher. There wasn't a whole lot to teach. They didn't have the reading, writing, and arithmetic. They would teach that in the schools to a degree, but they were there really to study the scriptures. They'd learn to read and write, which was important to being able to read the scriptures and continue the heritage. That's why people like Paul, Moses, who was raised in the prominent Egyptian family of the daughter of Pharaoh, he got an education. He's high up. Educations weren't cheap or free like we have them today. Now, nowadays, I wouldn't put my kid in a public school system for anything, but my kids are grown. They're in their 30s. But one of them did go to college, and I'm afraid I've lost him to the government for the time being. He became a Christian before he got pulled away, so I'm not worried about him. I'm hoping that we're here long enough to realize the problem and to leave it. But Yom Kippur is a day of going to God, following a few traditional things that they do, and of course fasting. And there's all kinds of rules on fasting. I'm not going to go into that now. First off, nobody should fast unless they know they're physically capable. And very few people, if any, can really handle the 40-day fast unless God kicks in. Jesus was able to do that, and he was ministered by angels. Tempted by Satan as well, but held his ground. But a day or two fast, or even a week, can be done without a whole lot of problems. And there are limits to what you can have. If you've got some kind of a medical condition, even the Bible makes amendments for it. Take your medication. Some of these Orthodox people go to great lengths to their needs. Nobody wants to give up coffee, especially when you're old like I am, and some of these old religious leaders. They've got pills that have caffeine in them. Some of them think, well, that's still taking something. They've got caffeine suppositories. Don't ponder on that too long. But ways to try to skirt around the law. I'm sure God appreciates that. But you're supposed to fast because you're supposed to suffer. That's why a lot of the things like the Exodus feast, if you will, eating, family gatherings, they had to eat bitter herbs to remind them of the bitter time in the wilderness and the escape. Unleavened bread because they didn't have time to let it rise and bake it. So there's a lot of reasons behind all these traditions. And right now, not having a temple, they are really tied to tradition more than anything, because that's all they have left. So the fast is an important one. Somebody above me is eating, or was eating. I don't see anybody up there. Another piece just fell down. Nature, I love it. I am still trying to find a place to move into. It's becoming very difficult. I need some help in this from God, so God's going to have to step in. I'm here right now, but there's a limited time that I can be here. It's crowded right now, and the people here were good enough to let us in. But I've only got a month and a half, and we're already through half of it, and we're going through the other half. I'm doing this to save money. I have to have enough money to get into a place. You got to pay first and last deposit sometimes. That's above that. We've got pets. We can hopefully get them approved by their little cards, their support animal, but a lot of places charge a deposit, monthly fee, things like that. So I do need to buy a house eventually, in my opinion. God, of course, has his own, and we're not totally communicative on this because we both agree that now is not the right time to buy, so we won't need to bother discussing it. Prices are way too high. They're doomed to get cut in half, and I don't want to be caught in that. If you got plenty of money and you can throw away money like that, go ahead. I'm living on my limited budget, and I can't do that. I've got a GI Bill I can use to get a VA loan. But even with it, you got to meet certain requirements. And right now, I'm unemployed because the entertainment business is on strike. Yes, we are getting low on funds, and I've asked for funds a few times, but everybody is, so I understand the price of everything. I can't walk out of the market without spending $100, and I can carry them in my hands. I remember I'd push 2 or 3 shopping carts when we had little kids, 2 or 3 shopping carts out for under $100. There's things that we don't buy anymore because they're too expensive, or if we do buy them, they're for special occasions. It's like it used to be. You wouldn't, you'd buy this special bottle of champagne for $100 for a special occasion, anniversary or something. I've drinking Dom Perignon, and it's okay. I mean, I'm quite happy to do with Brut or one of the other cheap champagnes for New Year's, but now I typically drink sparkling water, some flavored kind. I'm not completely dry. I will occasionally have something to drink, mainly if I'm in a social situation, and it would be awkward if I didn't. But I don't, make it a point. And I don't drink wine out of respect for Jesus. He won't have wine until he comes back, so I won't either. And I love wine. If he wasn't specific either, and I'm not trying to figure out how to skirt the rules, there is no rule for this. This is just a courtesy. We don't drink wine on communion. We drink grape juice, typically. Some places may have you drink wine. And again, if it was a social situation like that, I would do it. I would apologize to Jesus for doing that, saying I wouldn't, but they'd have to understand. Or if they make provisions for having grape juice. Grape juice is just very young wine. All right, getting back to Yom Kippur here, rabbit trails galore. The basic things that they would do is they fast, and they would gather together and read scriptures. They read out of Leviticus, Numbers, and Isaiah. Leviticus and Numbers are part of the 5 books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. That's the core Hebrew. Everything's in there. The beginning, how to live your life, examples by Moses, the law. Leviticus is going to talk about the Day of Atonement. Numbers 2. And Deuteronomy is really the law. Everything put down. And that should have been the end of it. The Mosaic law, the Deuteronomy, that should have been the end of it. But they had to create pages, thousands of pages, hundreds of pages anyway, of following law to go with that. They may say you can't eat pork. Well, they get into the point of saying, well, you can't eat this if it's this day of the week, and if it's this, and if the sun's in the right part. They're making up stuff. Because they're not listening to God when they're writing it. They're putting their opinion in. They're a perfect example. The Jews are, the Israelites, are a perfect example of don't add or take away from this book. We have our own, so we all share blame in this. Mormons have the Book of Mormon. There's other books out there. The Catholics have added some additional books that we don't include in the canon as Christians. Not saying that they're not Christians, but Pentecostals, if you will, or Presbyterians, all these different variations, these different belief systems. I'll go off on another little tangent. I've also always joked that we have multiple ways that Jesus healed. He laid hands on somebody and they got healed. He said words over them and they were healed. And we have churches for those. You've got to be able to lay hands on people. You got to speak in tongues and you can't heal. They have their place, and if they're proper, they're okay. But it's hard to tell. If you speak in tongues and don't have an interpreter, shut up. The Bible says that. But how do we know that the tongue speaker and the interpreter are giving us the right story? They each could have their own variation. The guy could speak in tongues, and the interpreter says what he wants you to hear. It may not be what he said. The Spirit will give us utterings that will speak to God in ways that we don't understand. We understand what tongues is about. The Spirit speaking through us. But you got to have an interpreter, and the interpreter has to be talking to the same God, so that that is a true message. And you can't tell unless they're speaking like they did at Pentecost in the language of the people that were there. Pentecost was the gathering, the yearly gathering. Everybody was there. So there were people from all over the country, all over the countries around Israel. So when they were speaking in a Italian dialect or using Italian words, there were Italians there that heard it and knew what they were saying. German the same way. Wherever these Jews came from, they heard it in their own language. That's a proper tongues that we can get behind. But the utterance that nobody understands, that only the Spirit does, only the Spirit will know whether they're telling the truth. I can get up and babble, say words that don't make any sense. I do it all the time on this channel. The bottom line is be careful. And the message behind that is why don't we have a church for the Holy Spittoon? You walk in the door, you spit in the spittoon. You keep a spittoon at the base of your seat. You don't even have to have chew. We're in the South, a lot of guys down here do this. They're cutting back like cigarettes because people getting cancer and stuff, but I don't know. Why don't we? Okay. We talked about the way this would work in the temple. Aaron would go in. I talked about this on my last video. They don't have a temple and they don't have an ark. Now, they do have a high priest. They've recently been picked and they've been practicing their rituals. But they don't, not that we've seen yet, they haven't been sanctified because we haven't had the red heifers yet. I think that's this fall they come of age. They had like 5 of them donated from someplace in Texas. They may have others. They've got to stay pure red. There cannot be one off-color hair any place on this calf. It would take a miracle to come up with one. That's the name of the purpose of the calf. It has to be a miraculous calf that can then be killed, burned as a sacrifice, and then the ashes from that burning put into holy water and sprinkled on everything God's. Starting with the priests, all the stuff that goes in the temple, and the temple itself. And then they can go to business and do what they're supposed to do. So the one day of the year they can do what they need to do. Now, we know as Christians, they don't need this. But they don't believe Christians. Because the founding fathers of the new current Jewish religion, post-temple, put in their instructions, hate Christians. Yeah, that's a really good godly thing, guys, who created this stuff. Hate somebody. Hate Christians. They wanted to carry that legacy on because they killed Jesus. Because they had hate. Some of them were legitimate. wanting to protect. Paul was that way. He wanted to protect his beautiful God and the stories that he had to go with it. And when he realized he was wrong, he flip-flopped 180 and went 100% for the Christians. So some of them, a small number, had the right reasoning. Nicodemus came and asked, what is all this stuff? How come you can do all these things? You must be born again. Start in John 3 and read that part before you get to 3:16. Okay, so let's take a look at Leviticus 16. And we're going to read about Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Now the Lord spoke to Moses after the death of his two sons of Aaron. His two sons didn't follow the rules, and they died. Aaron's two sons. They didn't do what they were supposed to do in the following of the rules in the temple. They got arrogant, I guess, and thought they could do whatever they wanted. So that's what this is about. Now the Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron, when they offered profane fire before the Lord and died. And the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron and your brother not to come in just at any time into the holy place inside the veil, before the mercy seat which is on the ark, lest he die. And we have someone in the future that tried to stable the ark as it was going to fall off a cart, and he died from it. This ark is dangerous. It houses God, and we are imperfect and cannot be in the presence of God pre-dying on the cross. For I will appear in the cloud above the mercy seat. So the Lord said to Moses, I will be in the cloud above the mercy seat. The mercy seat is some kind of, or the ark is some kind of a communication device. Now, in our modern technology, would we have a handheld ark that we carry around with us? Thus Aaron shall come into the holy place with the blood of a young bull as a sin offering, and of a ram as a burnt offering. He shall put the holy linen tunic on, linen trousers on his body, and he should be girded with a linen sash around his waist. Now, we've seen pictures of it. I might try to find a picture and put up. But they're dressed up pretty nice, and they have the board with all the gems on it on the chest, and they have essentially a turban on their head. I think I'll try to post a picture. It's pretty well decked out, and they've got all this stuff now. They've made it all. They're ready to go. These are holy garments, therefore he shall wash his body in water and then put them on. Don't just throw on these aren't your day clothes. These are your Sunday church clothes. And put them on, and he shall take from the congregation of the children of Israel 2 kids of the goats as a sin offering, and 1 ram as a burnt offering. Aaron shall offer the bull as a sin offering, which is for himself, and make atonement for himself and for his house. He shall take the 2 goats and present them before the Lord at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. Then Aaron shall cast lots for the 2 goats, 1 lot for the Lord and the other for the scapegoat. This is where the phrase comes from. One gets let go and one gets offered. And Aaron shall bring the goat on which the Lord's lot fell and offer it as a sin offering. But the goat of which the lot fell to be the scapegoat should be presented alive before the Lord to make atonement upon it and to let it go as the scapegoat into the wilderness. Get out of here quick. There's going to be a lot of hunters. I'm just going to read another verse here. You guys need to read these. I'll give you the verses. And Aaron shall bring the bull of the sin offering, which is for himself, and make atonement for himself and for his house, and shall kill the bull as a sin offering, which is for himself. I'm reading here, so if it repeats, God often repeats his messages. They're important. Then he shall take a censer full of burning coals of the fire from the altar before the Lord, in his hands full of sweet incense. See, I told you God loves incense. Not the smell of burnt offerings, but he loves incense. I got to get this up where I can read it. Okay. And as you put the incense on the fire before the Lord, and the cloud of incense may cover the mercy seat that is on the testimony, lest he die. He shall take some of the blood of the bull and sprinkle it with his finger on the mercy seat and on the east side, and before the mercy seat, he sprinkles some of the blood with his finger 7 times. God's use of 7. All this stuff is in here, how to do this. If you read on through, I'll give you the verses. The verses are Leviticus 16:1 through 34, Numbers 29, 7 through 11, and Isaiah 57:14 through 58:14. These are to be read on Yom Kippur, Sunday night through Monday. I'm not sure exactly what the timing is on this. I started in a synagogue learning Hebrew, and when I became a Christian, they asked me to leave, so I didn't get the blessing of all the history. I love history. Okay, and we're going to quickly look at, that was Leviticus 16:1, Numbers 29, 7 through 14. This covers the feast. If you go back to 28, they got the Passover. 29:1 is the Feast of Trumpets. But the Day of Atonement is on 29:7. On the 10th day of the 7th month, you shall have a holy convocation, gathering. You shall afflict your souls, fasting. You shall not do any work. It's a Sabbath day. You shall present a burnt offering to the Lord as a sweet aroma. 1 young bull, 1 ram, 7 lambs in the first year. Be sure they are without blemish. You see who Jesus is being? He is the Lamb of God, without blemish. God, if he sets a rule down, he follows it all the way. And it continues on in Numbers. And then if you go over to Isaiah, the subject of that, I'm looking at my time. See, I'm almost out of time. I'd love to give you the whole ceremony. I've watched videos on it. I've never actually been in one because they kicked me out. Okay, and we go to Isaiah 57:14. And one shall say, heap it up, prepare the way, take the stumbling block out of the way of my people. For thus says the high and lofty one, who inhabits eternity, whose name is holy. I dwell in the high and holy place, with him who has a contrite and humble spirit. He found a few, no perfect people, but just a good spirit. We talk about this to people all the time, saying that everyone's going to go to hell unless you accept Christ. And they say, well, what about the good people? Well, there are people who try to be good, but it won't get you to heaven. If you're a good person, why would you not accept a free gift of God? In most cases, I think they do. One of the other things that they do traditionally now, because they don't have the temple and all the stuff going on, they believe, as part of their daily ceremony, that God opens up 3 books to add to them every year. And the 3 books are the book of the wicked. We know who represents them. The book of the righteous, the book of life. And there's a book of in-between. And that's what it's called. There are 3 books. And he starts putting people's names in these books if they're not already in a book. Most Jews picture themselves being in the in-between book, because most people don't feel that they're righteous enough for God to put in the righteous book. So they put themselves in the in-between. Some choose to be in the wicked. I don't want to leave my friends behind. Stairway to heaven, highway to hell. One way up. It's a narrow stairway too. Now these are songs which help them illustrate. Highway to hell means that there's a lot of people going that way. So which book would you choose to be in? Like I said, most people will choose to be in the in between. That is one variation of one of the letters in Revelation, where God says, I'd rather you be hot or cold, but not in between. There's two ways to interpret that. One is what we just said. If you're in between, you haven't made a decision. He'd rather you be hot or cold and not in between. Now, part of this interpretation of that in Revelation is the town that they were in had a hot spring. They had no problem getting hot water, but cold water was impossible. So they brought cold water in from a long ways away in an aqueduct. By the time it got to town, it was lukewarm and didn't taste very good. You want to spit it out. Kind of how Jesus is saying, he'd rather you be hot or cold. He knows how to deal with you. In between, you're not defined. You haven't made a choice. You're sitting on the fence. Fall to one side or the other, but get off the fence. A lot of people are like that. They haven't made up their mind. They think they've got plenty of time. Time is running out. I can't quite count the sands in the hourglass, but they're getting down to where you can pinch it. When is the rapture? Don't know. Soon. The rapture is before Jesus comes back. So there's a few years yet to get to Jesus coming back. But nobody wants to live through the tribulation, however long you think it is. The seals and the trumpets and the bowls are nothing you would want to wish on anybody. Certainly not on your bride. Jesus wouldn't put that on his bride. But there are 3 raptures, so don't worry. One in the beginning, one in the middle, and one at the end. So if you see one, just be open to the other 2. Unfortunately, the people in the post-trib people, I have a hard time talking to them. I've talked about it before. They're very adamant that it is the one and only, and you're going to all have to suffer. You mean and evil people, I don't like you. That's kind of the attitude I get from them. And they shout. Everything is capital letters when they comment. It's like, lighten up. You're not supposed to hit people over the head with your family Bible. We're to be gentle and meek when we present the Lord. Don't be prideful. Don't think, oh, I'm better than you because I believe and you don't. Don't you dare do that. That's prideful, and pride goes before the fall. So don't do that. Be gentle and meek, and pray for everybody. Pray for our president, who's being very anti-Semitic. Pray for the other world leaders. Saudi Arabia is getting close to accepting a governmental business relationship with Israel. Out of the Muslims that surround Israel, they're the ones that have publicly said the Temple Mount doesn't mean anything to us. They're being honest. All the other ones are proxies of Iran, and Iran basically thinks the Jews need to be wiped off the face of the earth, that the whole world needs to be Muslim. And we're going to go ahead and play Cain and Abel. We're going to kill our brothers. That's their problem, because they've got people in there that have put this book together very sloppily. There was, I think, 300 to 500 variations of the Quran until they sat down and voted. Which one is the most popular? That's the one we're going to accept. Do some history studies on that. There's an ex-Muslim that teaches, and I'm not going into names right now. He's got some good history on it. But the mosque on the Temple Mount wasn't used for a mosque until after Muhammad. So there was no reason to go to Jerusalem. It said he went west. What? West Petra? Where? That's a long, many days travel. Remember, the wise men came from that area, from the east. Probably remnants of the Jewish people that were carted off to Persia, to Babylon. They didn't all go back. A lot of them stayed. I've talked about that before. Okay. How am I doing on time? I'm over my time again. I can't talk for just 30 minutes. But nobody should be forced to listen to me more than that. So we're going to end this. Think about God as the Jews are doing this weekend, starting Sunday evening through Monday evening. Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, where man would actually communicate with God through Aaron's sacrifice on the Ark of the Covenant. Think about that. Read the scriptures that I give you. I'd read them for you, but I don't have the time. Okay. It's interesting times. Any one of these fall holidays haven't happened yet. They could happen, and the rapture could be part of it. But there's still plenty of time during the tribulation for these things to happen. So don't worry. We're not getting, God's not going to let these slide. But they're going to happen at the appropriate time. I posted my little cartoon, my Peanuts cartoon. That's the rapture. God's going to convince Satan to attack. Say, I'm going to give you an opening. You can go attack. He's going to attack, and then he's going to pull the Christians out. That's the rapture. That's why we're being snatched away, so that Satan and his minions can't harm us. So be ready for it. Be looking. Don't criticize those that are looking or even trying to predict. We know that you cannot predict, and it's not the day or the hour stuff. That's talking about the second coming. There's just literally nothing mentioning when it's going to happen. You can pull, and you can try us just like toffee. The Bible can become toffee, and you can pull it and stretch it and make it say whatever you want if you want to. But it really doesn't say anything, because we're not supposed to know, because Satan's not supposed to know. Otherwise, he could prevent God from snatching it by changing his timing. I don't think that he could actually get away with it, but he would try. God's going to beat him every time, as he has every instance in the Bible where Satan has failed. He's tried to kill Jesus many times. He's not trying to kill Jesus now, because they probably see each other all the time, since Satan goes to God and Jesus is sitting next to him. I don't think they get along properly, but Jesus is going to be good, as we would expect him to be. But there is a limit to what he's going to take. Because shortly after this rapture, in this Revelation 12, Satan is thrown out of heaven. So he went over the line. Till we meet in the clouds. God bless.